I won't go back all the way, but I'm gonna kind of fly through these last 4 chapters because there's a lot of repetition from what we have done. And one of the things that I've done in doing personal work is use the first 3 chapters, sometimes 6, but usually the first 3, because so many people that we talk with, they have a worldly viewpoint. And so by talking with them just about what that viewpoint looks like and how insufficient it is to actually live by, it's proven to be a great intro to other lessons. But that's all I've used it for, just as a jumping off place. One of the things I've learned in personal work, anytime you study with somebody, the first thing you got to learn is, where are they? What do they know? What don't they know? What are their questions? And sometimes we just want to jump in with our agenda. And I found out that very seldom works. So, the book of Ecclesiastes jumps in under its agenda. And his agenda was, I'm going to figure out what life is all about. And I'm going to figure it out all by myself. And so he uses the phrase, under the sun, under heaven. And those phrases are indicative that we're not talking about what God reveals, but we're talking about what Solomon figured out. And sometimes he got it wrong. And what you'll find out is by the time you get to the end of the book, he's changed his opinion about what he stated over there. I just say that because anytime I see the book of Ecclesiastes quoted in an article or even in a sermon, I make a little asterisk to go back and check the context. Is that really what God is teaching, or was that simply what Solomon figured out under the sun? And because it's under the sun doesn't make it wrong, but it's not necessarily right. Y'all just need to remember that when you read this book. And that makes it difficult. And because it's trying to figure it out under the sun, and he doesn't really know what you all know. Y'all smarter than Solomon. From the standpoint, you have a greater revelation. We just have more knowledge from God. What Solomon had no clue about is, what's the afterlife really like? He didn't know. He knew there's going to be a judgment. How he knew that, I'm not exactly sure. But we have been blessed. But I like to read the book because it reminds me just how dumb smart people of the world are. They've got all this figured out. I was one of them at one point in time. But, so we jump into chapter 9. What can we actually know, figure out about life under the sun? About living today? And again, not necessarily what God has revealed, but this is going to be, how do we apply wisdom? And by the time we get to chapter 9, we've talked about wisdom and folly, and that we need to learn and we need to grow and we need to apply and we need to think. And so what does that look like? What are we going to do with that? So chapter 8 ended. I gave my heart to know wisdom, to see the task which has been done on earth, even though one should never sleep day or night. And I saw every work of God, and I concluded, man cannot discover the work which has been done under the sun. Even though man should seek laboriously, he will not discover, and though a wise man should say, I know, he cannot discover. Now, what we're talking about here is you can discover a lot, Solomon did. But what you cannot discover is the very works and purposes of God, except that God reveals that. Now, I picked on Richard before, and when others were here, and I always reach into my pocket and I pull something out. So, Jeff, it's your turn. What do I have in my hand? And Jeff says nothing. Now, that's his opinion. Jenna, what do you think? Oh, no. Now, her statement is absolutely true. Now, y'all realize I just put it back? And until I tell you what it was, you will never, ever, ever know. You'll have an opinion, and you will have your thought. That's what's going on with that. For example, we were just talking about this the other night after the meeting, about the idea of providence, where God has stepped in and acted on our behalf. And I told the story that this man was really excited, and he came to services, and he stopped the preacher and he said, "Preacher, I've had the most wonderful experience. I was on the way to a meeting and I had a flat tire, a blowout in my car, and it started to veer off the road and down into a ravine, and luckily enough I hit a tree. The providence of God saved me from being killed." And the preacher looked and said, "I'm not impressed. I've driven that road 1,000 times and God has always provided. I never had an accident." Now, which is the greater providence? And we usually make providence about certain events, singular, and we don't know. It's okay. When God saved you because you were on the right side of the boat that tipped over, the providence of God, and you're so happy. And my question is, well, why didn't he save the people on the left side of the boat? And nobody knows. Was he mad at them? Was he condemning? So what the Ecclesiastes writer is simply saying here, I figured out a lot of this, but there's just a lot of stuff about the working of God I don't know. How many of you are willing to say, I don't know? It's okay, because there's just lots of stuff. For example, I had a friend, I think he was in jest, but others said no, he was serious, that in the resurrection we're going to be 6 foot tall and weigh 145 pounds and look like we're 35 years old. Everybody. Huh, that's interesting. I wouldn't mind being 6 foot tall and weighing 140 pounds, but how did he know that? And he doesn't know that. So God said, my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, my thoughts are higher, different, more elevated than you're ever going to think and that you're ever going to do. And we need to hold God in that position that I don't know. I don't have the mind of God. So he also said in Jeremiah, I know, O Lord, the way of man is not in himself. How many of you memorized those two passages? When I first started preaching, the guy that I studied under made me memorize those and a whole bunch of other basic passages. Basically so I didn't get too big for my britches. I ate too many donuts and got too big for my britches anyway, but in a different way. And you just have to be able to step back and say, I don't know. Now, it may be knowable if you did more study, but maybe not. And so we need to be content, because there's a way which seems right unto a man, but the ends thereof can be the ways of death. And a lot of people have wrong ideas about God and religion and the Bible and what's supposed to happen, because they've not stuck with the book. And I'm going to tell you, you need to be a fanatic about sticking with the book. One of my favorite preachers that I also used as a mentor when I was preaching in Los Angeles, Brother Floyd Thompson. And he wrote a book called Book, Chapter, and Verse. In fact, it was his wife that wrote it, and it was a biography of him, because he would give you book, chapter, and verse for what it teaches. And then he was pretty good about simply not giving you his opinion. He had them, but he preferred not to do that. Long story, I'm going to quit there. So under the sun thoughts, I have taken all of this to heart and explained it to the righteous man, the wise man, and their deeds are in the hand of God. But man does not know whether it will be love or hatred or anything awaits him. He's talking about tomorrow. What are your emotions going to be tomorrow? Are you going to be filled with love? Are you going to be filled with hate? Are you going to be filled with kindness? Or are you going to be angry? Are you going to be ticked off because somebody does something to you? And so whether you're wise or whether you're not, you don't know what tomorrow's going to be. You know, my favorite illustration anymore, September 16th at 3 o'clock, I took off to ride my bicycle because I do that all the time. Boom. Changed everything. It may come back. So we don't know. That's why James said, when you say, I'm going to go to this town tomorrow and I'm going to do this and I'm going to, your life is a vapor. You don't know what tomorrow is going to be. And Solomon figured that out. But he did learn something. There's something about life that is the same for all people. Now, we've covered this because Solomon came up to this, and it was like a closed door to Solomon. He's getting all these thoughts going, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a point he can't get past. Do y'all remember what that is? Death. What happens after death? I don't know. But I know everybody dies. And so he goes on. There's one fate for the righteous and for the wicked, for the good and for the clean, for the unclean, for the man who offers sacrifice and the one who doesn't. A good man is, so is the sinner. As the swearer is, so is the one who is afraid to swear. And this is an evil in that all that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all mankind. Solomon just saw that. It's not fair. I'm over here trying to be good and you're over there not being good. And you're the one that is rich. And you're the one that is healthy. And you're the one that has all of it. And that's just not fair. And the truth of the life is, it's not. The richest people are not necessarily the best character. In fact, many times they got rich because they're not of the best character. So he said, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives, and afterwards they go to the dead. Is that right? And my first question is, then what? And you know what Solomon's answer is? I don't know, so I'm just going to go to the next verse. And at this point, he just changes the subject because he doesn't know at that point in time. One of the things that I've learned, both from personal experience and from experience of others towards me, is I don't know why you do the things you do. Motives. And we are very quick to begin to think and to judge motives. And the truth is, we don't know motives. And we need to back off from that. God knows the motive. So I'm willing to leave all judgment to God because God knows their abilities, their opportunities, their motives, what they are doing, and God will be absolutely fair and right in the judgment. And that's why He doesn't leave that up to you. Because we don't know. And I'm more than willing to do that. And so, what are you going to do? Well, rejoice, young man. This applies to all of us old men too, and old ladies, but we don't have any of them. Young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and the desire of your eyes, yet know God will bring you to judgment for all these things. That's chapter 11. And that adds to what we were just reading in chapter 9. That since we don't know, how am I going to live? Well, follow your heart. How many of you took jobs that you didn't like? Sometimes we have to. Sometimes we have to do that in order to feed our family, but that's not what I want to do. And, the old adage, well, just do what you want to do, and that'll make a good life for you. Wrongo bongo. I mean, if your desire is to play old-timey banjo, you're not going to make a living off of it. If your desire is to play bagpipes in Los Angeles, you're not going to make a living off of that. And so sometimes you got to take a job. Many musicians, many actors, they have to have a real day job because they can't make it over here. Okay, so do what you want to do as much as is possible. That's where you follow your heart. But sometimes you can't. Chapter 12, he said, God will bring every act into judgment. Did Solomon know about God's bringing people into judgment? Well, at least he talked about it. He may have just decided that's the only fair thing about this. So if the rich man dies, God will hold him to account. I think this was one of those deductions that Solomon made. And I'm not sure how much he knows. But you know what? I know you know. Can anybody here quote Hebrews 9:27? It's appointed unto man once to die, and then the judgment. John chapter 5, 28 and 29. It's another one we don't know very often, and that is, do not marvel at this. The hour is coming when all that are in the grave shall hear the voice of the Son of Man and shall come forth. Those that have done good to a resurrection of righteousness, those that have done evil to a resurrection of condemnation. But there is coming a day when that's going to happen on that. So having said that, back to chapter 9. Whoever is joined with all of the living, there's hope. Surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. Which one's more powerful? Which one? I mean, you can't even compare this on that. I told you one time a girl came and she was so upset. Her grandma was like 98 years old but was not a Christian and was kind of sick. And she said, do I go talk to her about Jesus and the gospel? And I asked one question. I said, is she still breathing? A live grandmother. Okay. Will she accept it? I have no earthly idea. She might. She might not. But the living know they will die. How many of you know that? How many of you picked the day? Well, first of all, I don't want to die. I like what I'm doing, and as Paul said, it's more needful here. But besides, how many of you are just comfortable living? And I'm scared of the process. Not where I'm going, but how am I going to get there? Run over by a truck? Dying a painful disease that takes 20 years? I don't know. But, he said, the living know they will die. The dead, they don't know anything. Careful, careful, careful. I've heard that quoted over and over and over again, that when people die, they don't know anything. They lose their memories. Do you all, and I hate to go to Luke 16 and the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, but there are some things there. Did the rich man know? He knew who Abraham was. He knew he was in pain and suffering. He knew that Lazarus wasn't. He knew that he had 5 brothers that still lived on the earth, and he knew those 5 brothers weren't living, right? Did he know something? Now, when we talk about this is from life under the sun. So, and I don't mean to be crass about this, but have you ever gone to a funeral and gone up to the casket and talked to the person? Did they ever talk back? Why didn't you do this? and it's as if they don't know anything. And so it's the under the sun appearance that he is talking about at this point, and not a claim of what the afterlife is like. They no longer have a reward. Their memory is forgotten. Our memory of them is what's forgotten. We were watching Discover or Finding Your Roots. Anybody else here watch that show? And it's always interesting to me. If they didn't have a gazillion people doing that research and reading all that microfilm, they'd never find any of that stuff out. And I don't have a gazillion people on my side. And the moment that I discovered that Bushwhacking Sam was one of my relatives, I said, that's enough. Don't need to know any more on that. But when we talk about that is, I don't know what my great-grandparents were like. You know, I would be lucky to know their names. But what were they really like? When they said, I love to each other, what did that mean to them? How did they live with one another? Were their children easy to raise or hard to raise? Did they love their jobs? Or did they work what they had to? And, you know, none of that. But I'm going to tell you, that was a big thing to them, just like it is to me. But, you know, my kids don't even know all of that stuff about me. And so when they die, their memory is forgotten. Indeed, their love, their hate, their zeal have already perished, and they will no longer have a share in all that is done under the sun. Again, does that mean that Grandpa is not watching me? I don't know. But what I know is he can't do anything about it. And he has no part or parcel in the choices that I make and do. So, enjoy this life. That's what we have control of. So, go then, eat your bread in happiness, drink your wine with cheerful heart. God has already approved your works. Let your clothes be white all the time, and let not oil be lacking in your head. And this is the common thread that he keeps coming back to. Enjoy this life while you're living. Make sure it's a godly life, but enjoy this life. And people, we sometimes have a guilty conscience about that. First time I went across the border down into Mexico to talk to some of the brethren down there about an issue that they were having, and we went to this one brother's house, and it literally was a cardboard shack. And I noticed that there was this long extension cord that went up over this little hill. And what I discovered was he owned the property up on that little hill. And the brethren got kicked out of their meeting place by an ungodly preacher. And so they came down here and they used picks and shovels and wheelbarrows and leveled it off, and they built them a cardboard meeting house. And they were so proud of that, they had to take me up there to see their meeting house. And that's where that electric cord went. And when he went into that, here in the middle of the meeting house, that cord came down, and there was a bulb attached to it. That was the light. And there were a bunch of folding chairs that they obviously had collected from any source they could, including the dump. And I looked up to the front, and they had a table for the Lord's Supper. You know what it really was? It was an old television set that they'd taken the guts out of it, and it was just the cabinet of the TV set. And the preacher had a blackboard that he could write on. And the interesting thing was they still had Mickey and Donald up in the corner of that. But that was their meeting place, and they were proud of it because they had built it, and they were meeting there, and they were being faithful. And then we went back down to their house, and we sat there, and the wife insisted on bringing out some cookies, and went with another older friend of mine, and she insisted that we take a couple of those cookies and a glass of water. First of all, I didn't really want to drink the water. And second of all, she had 4 or 5 kids that were peeking in the door. So I saved those cookies and gave them to the kids as we walked out. I can have cookies anytime I want, and that was a special treat for them. But I went home guilty. I pull into my house, and I've got this house and lights and microwave and a refrigerator. But then I finally learned, no, it's just because that's the way life is. And if you were born 60 miles south of where I was, then maybe you were that way. Now, I don't have answers for all of that stuff. I just know from what Ecclesiastes says, enjoy what you have, but be thankful for it. And acknowledge that God has it. And be willing that if it disappears, you're still going to be godly. And you're still going to serve God. And so, while you're here, let your clothes be white. Be industrious enough, take care of it. You don't have to be dirty. Well, some can't help that. So, conclusion. Enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which He has given to you under the sun. When we get married, how many of you heard, do you take this woman to be your awful wedded wife? For better, for worse, richer or poor, sickness and in health, until death do you part. And I'm going to tell you, on the wedding day, that's a no-brainer. Of course I do. That's why I'm here. I'm still waiting for somebody to say, well, what do you think? We're here. But 10 years later, when something happens in your life and you find out it is for poor and it is in sickness and it is going to be a long haul, the good news is you're not going to die from this. The bad news is you're going to be sick for 90 years. Would we still? And this is what Solomon's talking about, is commitment. Now, how many wives did Solomon have? I find it absolutely amazing. And here's my guess. It's hard enough to live with one, let alone 300. And I know I'm in trouble. But he understood having 300 is not going to make you happy. He'd been there and done that. So enjoy the wife of your youth. This is your reward in life and your toil in which you have labored under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do it with all of your might. There's no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol where you are going. Again, he doesn't know that. Because God did not say that. Sheol is the land of the unseen. And when the person dies, all they really knew was this thing that they called the spirit, the Rosh, the soul, it disappeared. But they didn't know where it went. And they didn't know what it was like. But it obviously wasn't like what you and I are doing. Well, was that true? Turn to the New Testament to find out. Solomon didn't know. And so he said, again, I saw under the sun, the race is not to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors, and neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favor to men of ability, for time and chance overtakes them all. And that last phrase is so important in our life. Accidents happen. Who's at fault? Oftentimes nobody's at fault. It's just what happens. And there's so many things that are just out of our control. How's our economy going to do next year after the elections? You all shrug your shoulders. Why don't you know? First of all, I don't know who's going to win the election. Second of all, my experience is I've lived through Jimmy Carter, and I've lived through Ronald Reagan, and I've lived through Bill Clinton and the Bush clan. And the economy has been like a roller coaster, and my life has been pretty much standard. I waited in line under Carter to get some gas, but basically my life didn't change during these last 40 years. And I don't expect it to change this next year. But could it? We don't know. And so just remember, time and chance really will simply happen to all of us. And that doesn't mean that anybody's at fault. So, moreover, man does not know his time, like a fish caught in the treacherous net or birds trapped in a snare. The sons of men are ensnared at an evil time when suddenly falls on them. That's not always true, is it? If you've been sentenced to death and they're going to carry that out May 3rd at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're one of the few people in this world that know exactly when you're going to die. Unless the governor decides to pardon you. Or the Supreme Court decides we need to look at this again and on the court. So even those that have the sentence don't know what's going to happen. So if you don't know when you're going to die, how do you live? You got two choices. Think about this. I'm going to be 103 because Grandma lived 102. So I'm not worried about dying tomorrow or next year. True or false? Absolutely false. Okay. Then I'm going to live as if it could happen tomorrow. Yeah. Not expecting it, but it could. So, the sons of men don't know what's going to happen. And so this I came to see is wisdom under the sun, and it impressed me. There was a small city with a few men in it, and a great king came to it, surrounded it, constructed large siege works against it, and there was found in it a poor wise man. And he delivered the city by his wisdom. And being delivered, nobody remembered him after that. They didn't appreciate it. They didn't say thank you. They didn't make him their king. They didn't. Does that happen? Yeah. Not always, but a lot of times. So I said, wisdom's better than strength. This little city with one wise man beat this great king. And it can happen, and did. And wisdom of the poor man is despised, and his words not heeded. I think that applies to the after the success. And he was just talking about this. Yeah, they listened to him and he saved the city, and then they went back to their life. And he was nothing. So you want to be that poor little wise man? And the answer is, yeah, I would hope so. Will I get great accolades? A ticker tape parade? The answer is probably not, but it doesn't matter. So the words of the wise are heard in quietness, are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than the weapons of war. But one sinner can destroy it all, destroy much good. And so Solomon said this, I don't know how many times. I'm going to try wisdom. Well, it didn't solve everything, so I'm going to try foolishness. And I discovered wisdom's better than foolishness. And he's hold on to that. So be wise. Jeff, how do you be wise? Janice, since you have the answer. You be wise by being wise. But what in the world does that mean, Bill? I started to agree with you on that, but I don't want to go there with that. The wisest thing you can do is love God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And that is the wisdom of God on our living on that. So, we're going to go and immediately jump into chapter 10. And Jeff, just make another break. That's a bad chapter break. In fact, a lot of this wisdom chapters are just bad chapter breaks. They're just continuing on. So if the foolishness of one man can destroy much good, it's kind of like how dead flies make a perfumer's oil stink. I think the old King James says apothecary on that. I can say apothecary, but perfumer, I stumble over the tongue on that. But the most precious oil for smelling good when you start getting dead flies in it is putrid. One foolish man can destroy much good. And all Solomon is saying is, don't be that man. Don't be the fool. And a little foolishness is greater than wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart directs him towards the right, and the foolish man's heart directs him towards the left. And that's why we have more right-handed people in the world than... No. Right and left is used here, meaning correct, good, pure, versus wrong. So, the wise man is going to look for the correct answer. What happens if the correct answer means it's harmful to you? It means you're going to have to change. It means to do the right thing may cost you money. To do the right thing may get you fired. I'm going to tell you, those are hard decisions. But wisdom tells you, do the right thing. And when you figure that out. So a wise man's heart leads him to the right thing. Even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking and he demonstrates it. It doesn't take very long to find out the person's a fool. Scares me to death. One of the ideas of seeing a fool is he talks all the time. What do preachers do? That has scared me my whole life of preaching. Make sure what you're teaching. Don't many of you be teachers. So, that is just hard. But you can't teach without talking. And so Solomon again is just making these general principles about life. And so if the ruler's temper rises against you, do not abandon your position. That's not your mental position or your argument on that. It just means don't turn around and walk out. Don't quit your job and leave because the composure allies great offenses. If you were going to quit your job of being an advisor to Solomon, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? What job are you going to apply for? Who's going to hire you? And so, under the days of the kings, this was very important. And so, don't just fly off the handle. You go in and you advise the king and he says, that's nonsense. Then I'm quitting. No, you need to stay there. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, like an arrow which goes forth from a ruler. Folly is set in many exalted places, will rich man set in humble places. And I've seen slaves riding on horses and princes walking like slaves in the land. Maybe the king is a fool, but he's king. And maybe you are wiser than that, but you're not the king. And so learning your place, learning your position in life, learning where you can be effective. And that is so difficult. We all like to think we're able to do this and advise, and a lot of us just aren't. He who digs a pit may fall into it, and a serpent may bite him who breaks through a wall, and he who quarries stones may be hurt by them, and he who splits logs may be endangered by them. Time and chance happens to everybody. It won't happen to me. Famous last words. And it does happen to us. And when it does happen, what you realize is, it doesn't mean that I'm a fool necessarily. It may indicate that. But that means it also didn't indicate that for the other person. Be careful in your judgments of other people and circumstances. It may just be circumstance. When lightning strikes your house, does that mean God's mad at you? Could be. Yeah. Actually, I doubt it seriously because there's no record of God acting that way, but Sodom and Gomorrah, but it was the whole town on that. So just be careful on this. If the axe is dull and you don't sharpen it, then you must exert more strength. Wisdom has an advantage giving success. Bill, do you keep your tools sharp? Your hammer? And I ask that because obviously you understand and you can make these judgments. There are tools that need to be sharp, and if you're going to use them, it makes all the world and the difference. But I'm going to tell you the other thing it makes is they're dangerous. I had a friend that is really, 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 really good with tools, and another friend that sent some wood chisels down to him to be sharpened. And the guy that sharpened them warned him. He said, "These are sharp. Be careful." And he had sharpened them, and they were like a surgeon's blade. So you know what my other friend did? He had to test it and just about sliced his thumb off. And we all looked at him and go, "Dummy?" He warned you. But it's better to have sharp chisels than use a hammer on everything. It doesn't work. So that's just the practical aspect of wisdom. You all get this? Wisdom doesn't always mean great things. Oftentimes it's just little things that are smarter to do in life than being dumb. So, in all of your wisdom, all of your getting, get wisdom. Okay, we'll have to pick up there next week.